My parents told everyone I was dead. I found out my parents had been telling people I was dead. The strangest part wasn't the lie itself. It was the fact that they had been telling it for years while I was still alive, still going to school, still sitting at the same dinner table with them every night. I was 21 when I discovered it. I wasn't supposed to find out, and honestly, I wish I never had. It started with a photograph. I was cleaning up my father's garage one Saturday afternoon because he was finally getting rid of some old boxes. Most of them were completely ordinary. Christmas decorations, school notebooks, broken electronics, things nobody had touched in years. Then I found a small cardboard box underneath an old blanket. My name was written on the top, not my full name. Just one word, Daniel. I opened it expecting to find childhood pictures. Instead, I found a newspaper clipping. The paper had turned yellow with age. At the top was a small article about a child who had disappeared 12 years earlier. I almost stopped reading when I saw the photograph. It was me, not someone who looked like me. Me. The same crooked front tooth, the same little scar above my eyebrow, the same blue jacket I remembered wearing when I was 8. Underneath the photograph were the words, "Local family mourns missing son, Daniel Carter." I stared at the page for almost a full minute. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny. I laughed because my brain couldn't figure out what else to do. I had never been missing. At least that's what I'd always been told. According to my parents, when I was 8, we'd moved because my father got a better job in another state. I remembered packing boxes. I remembered leaving my school. I remembered being angry that I had to leave my friends, but I didn't remember disappearing. I took the newspaper into the house and waited for my mother to come home. When she walked through the door, I put the clipping on the kitchen table. She looked at it, and immediately all the color left her face. She didn't ask where I'd found it. She didn't ask why I was looking through the box. She just whispered, "Where did you get this?" That was the moment I knew the story I'd been told my entire life was incomplete. I asked her the simplest question I could think of. "Mom, why does this say I was missing?" She sat down. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she said something that scared me more than any explanation could have. "Because Daniel, for a while, you were." I thought she meant physically missing. I thought maybe I'd been lost for a few hours as a child and simply forgotten about it. But then she told me something I still have trouble saying out loud. My parents had told everyone I was dead, not missing, dead. My grandparents, my father's brothers, people from our old neighborhood, even some of my mother's closest friends. They had held a funeral for a child who was still alive. Me. I couldn't understand it. "Why would you tell people your own son was dead?" I asked. My mother started crying. She told me the story began 12 years earlier on a rainy evening in October. I had been 8 years old. My father had been driving home from work when another car followed him for several miles. He noticed it, but thought nothing of it. When he reached our neighborhood, the car continued past our house. The next morning, my father received a phone call from an unknown number. The person on the other end didn't introduce himself. He simply said, "You should have listened the first time." Then he hung up. My father didn't tell my mother, not immediately. He thought it was some kind of mistake. But 2 days later, someone broke into our house while we were asleep. Nothing was stolen. Not the television, not the money in my mother's purse, nothing. The only thing missing was a photograph of me. My parents panicked. They contacted the police, but there wasn't enough evidence to explain what was happening. Then came the part I didn't remember. One afternoon, my father took me to my grandmother's house because my parents had to leave town for a few days. I never arrived. According to my mother, my father stopped at a gas station on the way. He went inside for less than 2 minutes. When he came back, I was gone. The car door was still locked. The window was closed. There was no sign of a struggle. I had simply disappeared. The police searched for me for days. My photograph appeared on missing child posters. My parents barely slept. And then, 4 days later, they received another phone call. The same voice said, "If you want your son alive, stop looking." My mother said that was when they made the decision that changed everything. They told the police they had received information suggesting I was dead. They didn't have proof. They didn't even know if I was alive, but they believed the person watching them wanted them to stop searching. So they publicly accepted the idea that I was gone. They held a private funeral. They told relatives that they had found my body, even though they hadn't. They moved away. They changed their phone numbers. They stopped talking about me. But then, 3 weeks after I disappeared, I was found. Alive. I was discovered outside a small rural hospital nearly 200 miles away. I had no serious injuries. I was dehydrated, frightened, and barely speaking. When the police asked me what happened, I couldn't explain it. I didn't remember where I'd been. I didn't remember who had taken me. I only remembered being inside a dark room and hearing someone tell me, "Your parents don't want you anymore." My parents rushed to the hospital. They took me home that same night, but they never told anyone I had been found. They kept the lie alive. I asked my mother why. She looked at me and said, "Because the person who took you never stopped looking for you." I didn't believe her. I wanted to, but part of me thought this was some terrible excuse they'd created to explain something they didn't want me to know. Then my mother opened another box. Inside was a police report. It contained one piece of information I'd never heard before. The night I was found outside the hospital, a nurse on her way to work had seen a dark car slow down near the entrance. She saw a man lean out and place something on the ground before driving off. That something was me. She hadn't seen his face clearly, but she remembered one detail. He was wearing a silver ring with a small black stone. My mother reached into the box and pulled out a photograph of my father. He was standing beside me on my 8th birthday. I looked at his hand. He was wearing the same kind of ring. I immediately looked at my mother. "Dad?" She shook her head. "No, that ring belonged to your grandfather first. He had two made. One for your father, one for your uncle, so they'd always have something to remember him by. Your father showed his to the police the same week I gave them this photograph. His ring never left his hand. It was never a match for what the nurse described, except in the one detail that mattered." Then she showed me the last page of the report. There was a name, Michael Carter, my uncle, my father's younger brother. I had barely heard his name growing up. My parents always told me he had moved overseas before I was born, but according to the report, he had been questioned after my disappearance. He had denied knowing anything about me. Then he disappeared. For 12 years, nobody knew where he was. I asked my mother why she had never told me. She said because she had spent 12 years trying to give me a normal childhood. She didn't want my first memories of growing up to be police interviews, missing person posters, and fear. She wanted me to have birthdays, school, friends, a life that didn't revolve around the worst thing that had ever happened to our family. And suddenly, I understood something. My parents hadn't told people I was dead because they didn't love me. They had told them because, at the time, they genuinely believed it was the only way to keep me alive. But there was still one question I couldn't let go. Why had my uncle taken me? We never got the answer that day. 2 months after I found the newspaper clipping, police located him living under a different name in another state. He was arrested, and during questioning, he finally admitted that he had been involved in my disappearance. But he claimed he never intended to hurt me. He said someone had paid him to take me and keep me hidden for a few days. He refused to say who. He also said something that stayed with me. Your parents weren't supposed to find you. The police never identified who had paid him. That part of the case was closed without an answer, and it likely always will be. Some doors once shut don't open again. But I finally understood why my parents had spent 12 years pretending their son was dead. They weren't grieving me. They were protecting the life they had managed to get back. And that changed the way I remembered my childhood. For years, I thought my parents were overly protective. I thought they worried too much. I thought they were afraid of everything for no reason. Now I know they had a reason. They had already lost me once. They just never knew if the person who took me was coming back. I spent years wishing my parents had told me everything, but now that I know the truth, I'm not sure I would have wanted an 8-year-old version of me to carry it. Maybe my parents weren't trying to erase my past. Maybe they were trying to give me a future. And perhaps that's the hardest thing about growing up, realizing that the people who raised you were fighting battles you were too young to see. My parents told the world I was dead, but they never stopped hoping I'd come home. And eventually, I